Hey everyone, and welcome back to Developer Soapbox. And in today's video, I'll be going over how to create a Spring Boot project using strictly command line tools. This is mostly just me having fun. So even though it's a little bit different than other tutorials I've done, I do think that most people will gain some knowledge out of this, either some cool new Vim commands or how to create a Spring initializer project using curl, which I thought was awesome myself. tmux, which is an awesome window manager for command line. So before I keep talking here, let's go ahead and get started. And unfortunately, the tools that I'll be using are for Unix-based operating systems only. So either any Linux distributions out there, like I'm using Ubuntu myself, or if you're using Mac OS 10, I'm pretty sure it has these tools available as well, since it's based on FreeBSD. So unfortunately for my Windows 10 friends out there, if you'd like me to go over a way that you can do this using, for example, Windows subsystem for Linux, I can definitely do a video on that. So if that is something that is in demand, just let me know in the comments down below. So before we can get started, we do need to install these tools. Using Ubuntu Linux, I'm just going to do a sudo apt install. The first tool is Vim, which is a classic text editor. Second one is tmux, which is short for terminal multiplexer, which is basically a window manager for the command line. Next one is curl, which is a command line HTTP client, and we'll be using this to generate our Spring initializer project. Next one is unzip. And lastly, if you don't already have JDK installed for Java, you do need OpenJDK or whatever JDK version you decide to use. I'm going to be using OpenJDK 11, and I do already have this installed in my system. It just to save you some time, I did move my desktop recently to a different room, and since I am on Wi-Fi, this thing is dreadfully slow, so I do already have a lot of these things preloaded. And now that we have our tools installed, we can actually get started in generating the project. So the first thing I'll be showing you is how to generate a Spring initializer project using curl. And if you watch any of my videos, I'm a huge fan of the Start Spring IO website, which is basically a generator for Spring Boot projects. So if you've never gone there, I highly recommend it. Just start.spring.io, and as you can see, it allows you to generate a Spring Boot project. You just specify what kind of project and your dependencies and hit generate, and it generates a zip file for you. So this thing is awesome, but since we're restricting ourselves to the command line, a lot of people don't know, but there is actually a API for that project. So without knowing anything about what the API structures or resources are, if I simply do, let me clear this out. If I simply do curl and the address of that site, so start.spring.io, you can see that it provides us some awesome documentation here on how to generate or project just using the curl command. So here I have, by default, it's a Maven project, but if you want to specify, if you do want to specify what kind of project, you can specify as one of the options. You can specify what version of Java, you can specify any of your dependencies. So here are all the available dependencies and the ID that you would specify. And then at the bottom, there are even some examples of the commands. And let's use one of those examples, right? So let me do curl https start.spring.io/starter.zip, and then -d space dependencies and a comma separated list of my dependencies. So in my case, I'm going to use H2 for my database. I want JPA, or I'm sorry, it's data-jpa. And again, if you're not sure what to actually write here, just look up here at your list of available dependencies. So I want also data rest, and lastly, I do also want Lombok to make writing my my beans a little bit simpler, lombok. Then I want to specify my Java version, and I'll be using 11. And lastly, just -o for my output file name. And in this case, I'm just going to call it demo.zip. That's what they do by default. I'm just going to leave it as is and hit enter. And if we ls in here, there's my demo.zip, which is essentially my complete project with all my dependencies that I just specified. And let's move this project into our own directory. So I'm just gonna make a directory here, and I'll just call this my project, keep it simple. And I'm just gonna move that file into the directory. And then I'm just gonna go into the directory and unzip the new file. Now that we have our project, let's go ahead and edit the files with Vim, which is our text editor. But before we can do that, there are some options that we need to specify within our vimrc file, which is basically Vim's user-specific configuration. So I'm just going to edit that file by doing Vim. That file should be inside of your user's home directory. So in this case, tilde is used for that, or I can specify, home username and .vimrc. And so the first option or configuration I'm going to set is set ts equals 4 and sw equals 4. And that's just some tab spacing options, basically just going to replace my tab space with 4 white spaces. And that's just going to make it easier for you guys to read. Second one is set path plus equal and ##. And what this is going to do is add recursive partial search for our file search within Vim. And lastly, we'll do set wild menu, and this allows you to tab through the file names when you're doing your find. So I'm just going to hit escape, so exit out of insert mode, and shift : and X, and what that's going to do is save right to the file and actually exit. So X, and that exit is out. What we want to do now is go into tmux. So just type in tmux and hit enter. And like I mentioned before, this tmux is basically a pretty awesome command line terminal window manager. So it allows you to create, multiple panels for your command lines. So what we're going to do here is it's going to look very similar to like a Visual Studio Code, where you're writing your code on top and then have your terminal at the bottom, which allows you to, execute your project or server, run your server as you're actually editing the files. And the way tmux works once you have it, executed or open, is a little bit odd. So the initiator command is control. So if you hold the control and hit B, and then followed by the command, and I believe B is for bind. If any of you know what B actually stands for, just please put it down below in the comments. I'm curious about it myself, but I'm pretty sure it's bind. So for example, if I do hold control and then hit B, hold control, hit B and release, and then if I do, for example, shift and 5 or percentage, right, you can see that percentage opens up a window to the right, but I don't want to the right. We actually want it below. So what I'm gonna do is, again, control B and then double quote. So shift quote, and you can see that it opened my window at the bottom, which is what we want. And the way that we move between top and bottom is, again, hold control, hold B, release, and then use the arrow keys, right? So if I do control B up, you can see I'm up here. If I do control B down, I'm down here, right? So we're gonna do, again, Vim up top and leave just a terminal at the bottom. But before I can do that, let me go ahead and resize the bottom as well. So to do that, just like we move with the arrow keys, right? But I'm gonna do control, hold B, and instead of releasing control and B, I'm gonna keep holding it, and then I can use my arrow keys. So you can see I'm going down. If I put up while I'm holding control B, you can see that it goes up and down. So that looks about right. Let's do that, and let's move up again. So you can see I'm up here again, and let's go ahead and open Vim. So just type in Vim and enter. And now that we're in Vim, if I do, shift colon, I can do find. And this goes back to that path plus equal asterisk asterisk that we did, right? So for example, now I can do partial finding a file. So I don't have to know the entire name. For example, if we want to find all the Java files within recursively within the directory that we're in, we can do that and hit tab. And look at that. That's pretty awesome, right? So we have all the Java files in our project right now. So, and let's go ahead and open that file. So I'll just go demo application.java. And what we actually want though is to create things within different files. Again, it would be a lot easier to just put everything within the same file, since we're in kind of a foreign editor here. It's not that easy to go in between files. But the whole point of this exercise is to not only have fun, but also to see how difficult it would be to work with in a real scenario, right, with multiple files and so on. So what I'm gonna do is I am gonna write a different entity class file and a different file for my actual REST API and so on, right? So we're probably gonna have maybe 3 or 4 files total. So not too bad, but at least it'll give us a sense of how difficult it would be working with many different files. So I'm just gonna do shift colon, and I'm gonna edit a file, and I did copy that the path of my of this file, right, which I do want it within the same directory, and I am just gonna use the same package as well. So I'm gonna call my my entity beer. And if you've done any of my other tutorials, this is just something I do. I just do an API with a list of our favorite beers. So, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So it's just going to be a RESTful API. It's going to have a beer entity, and we're going to be able to insert new beers, get the list of beers, and so on. So let's go ahead and edit that file. And I did have to correct my file extension. It is beer.java, right? So I'm editing beer.java right now. I am gonna use the same package, right? So just to go into insert mode. So package com.example, and then I'm just gonna import everything that I need. So import JavaX annotation. And I guess this is one major downside of using something like Vim is the fact that you don't have generator, right? So you can't just like in Eclipse where you just use the class and then basically it kind of suggests different classes for you to import. So this is definitely kind of a pain, but bear with me for a second. I might actually just fast forward this for you guys. In there I have my imports, just saving you guys some time there. And then what I'm gonna do is just public class beer, and I'm just gonna do field of ID. Let's do name, string name, double ABV, which is just the alcohol content, right? And up here in the ID, I do need to specify that it's my ID, and it is a generated value, and the strategy for generation is identity. So generation type.identity. Okay, and because I'm super lazy and I don't want to do all my getters and setters, that's exactly why we imported Lombok, right? So with Lombok, I can just do data, and it's gonna automatically generate getters and setters and all that we need for for this to be considered a JPA entity, right? But I do need to specify that it is entity as well. And lastly, I do need to import, that is what I missed, is lombok.data. And quick correction that my package is example.demo. So let me correct that. And then let's go ahead and do W for write that file. And you can see that we now have our entity class. Next, let's go ahead and do our actual REST API. And what we're going to do is within the same directory, I'm just going to do, again, edit. And I'm just going to call this REST repository. So REST repository.java. And now we're in the file, same thing. I'm just going to, let me just pause this really quick, just again to save you some time. And all I did was my package name and my imports. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Spring Data JPA, which basically allows you to use a repository interface, and just by using it one simple annotation, which is repository REST resource, it will essentially create a RESTful API for you based on the repository. It's a pretty awesome approach that Spring provides to us, and that's what we'll be using here, just to keep things as simple as possible. So I'm just going to do, again, repository REST resource, and the way we do it is you just have to specify an interface. I'm going to call this again REST repository, and I'm going to extend one of Spring's repository interfaces. So I'm going to use CRUD repository, and then you just have to specify the entity class, which in my case is beer, and then what the type of the ID is, and that's all we have to do there. I'm just going to escape, :W to write, and save. If you're not familiar with this approach, I do have a video on this by itself, which I'll put the link to in the description down below. As far as I know, this is like the easiest way to generate a REST API in Java. If you know of any better ways, let me know in the description down below. But I mean, this is like a single line, and you have a full CRUD RESTful API, which is pretty awesome. Next, let's go ahead and edit our application.properties file, and we're just going to add some database configuration. So again, I'm just going to do it. And let's say that, for example, even here, right, I don't remember what the path is, right? So if you want to, within Vim, if you want to just use a file explorer to be able to search through the directory structure, you can just do edit, space, and period. And that'll give you this, which is a nice, directory explorer. So it's going to just be in resources, and there's my application.properties there. So let me just select that, and let me go ahead and type in all the properties that I need. Since this is just based on a project that I've already done, and I'll put the link down in the description below, I went ahead and just paused the video and wrote down all the configurations, right? So here we're just using an H2 in-memory database, and let's go ahead and just save this. And we can actually, we should have all the files we need here, right? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna jump to my terminal down below and actually start my my project. So to do that, again, Control B down, and if we go into my project, one really awesome thing about Spring Boot that it is kind of self-contained. It has everything it needs, including Maven executable right there. So that's what we're gonna do, is we're just gonna do Maven W, and then Spring Boot run. And once your project has completed loading, you should see something like this. And right now, you can see we have two screens. One is basically for our server, right? So for executing our server and seeing the logs. The other is Vim. So it looks like we do need another one, right? So another actual panel. So what we're gonna do, let's go ahead and do another one. So Control B and to double quote. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use this window to actually use curl, right? So I'm just resizing here, again, Control B up and down, right? And let's go ahead and do a curl command just for our resource. So let's do curl HTTP localhost port 8080, and by default, what Spring Data JPA, that RESTful resource annotation will do is by default, it basically pluralizes the entity class, right? So if I do beers, you can see right now we don't have any beers. So let's go ahead and add one. So we can do that with a post, right? So if I just do curl, and this is gonna be a post, within my header, I'm gonna do content type is application JSON. And then I specify my actual payload with -d, followed by the actual payload. And for my payload, I just need to specify a name and ABV. So for my name, I'm gonna do highlight. If you're from Florida, this is a Tampa beer, which is probably one of my favorites. And the ABV is, I believe is 7.5. If I'm wrong, let me know. And then after payload, we just need to specify the actual resource address, which in our case is just localhost 8080 beers. And there you go. You can see that actually added, and so it did return the body of the particular resource. So for example, if I do beers 1, right, just for that one resource, there we go. So there's my beer that I've added. And that's it for the project. But before we go, I did want to review just a few commands for Vim if you're not familiar with it. If you work for any medium to large size company, I guarantee that you are going to have to deal with Vim at some point in your career. You're going to have to edit some configuration file on a server, and you're not going to have access to any other editor. Vim comes by default to in any Linux distribution, so I guarantee you're gonna have to deal with Vim at some point in time. So personally, I just know 6 commands or something like that, and it's enough to get me by. That's one of the reasons I wanted to try this, just because it's one of those things that you have to learn it at some point. There are people out there that can probably do Vim as quickly as I can use Visual Studio Code. So it's definitely powerful if you get to know it better. But let me go ahead and go into my top window here, and just to go through a few commands, right? So the way the Vim works is, and I'm not going to go too detailed here. I mean, there are much better Vim tutorials out there, but just to give you the few commands you need to know for a career, for example. So it has this concept of you're in edit mode, you're in some type of command mode, right? So you can do commands against Vim itself, or you can be editing the file itself. So the way you go into edit mode is you press I. So you can see that now I'm in insert mode. You can see it down here, right? So then I can write, I can edit my file, and then to exit edit mode, I just hit escape. And then once I'm out of edit mode, I can do commands within Vim itself, right? So for example, some useful ones are if I do ls, it lets me see all the files that are open within the buffer, right? So another one that you saw, that's really useful is find. Again, this allows you to find, basically any file given partial file name. So if I do that, again, now we can see all of the available Java files, including the ones that we created. Okay, another one, once we're in here, so if I do GG, it takes me to the top of the file. If I do Shift G, so uppercase G, takes you to the bottom of the file. If you're within a line, $sign is end of line, 0 is beginning of the line. If you want to search for a particular word within the file, you just do slash and then the word. So if I do, for example, public, it finds the first one. If I hit N, it finds the next one. So you can just keep doing N and it'll find the next one. And then again, so if I do exit, W is write, X is write and exit. If I want to just exit the file and not save, right? So if I do Q for quit and exclamation, it would just exit and not save. I've had to edit a lot of files in my lifetime with Vim, but just using these quick commands was enough to get me by until now, and stay pretty comfortable in it. So, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this content. It was definitely fun for me. So thank you very much and enjoy your day.